Right, we're good? Yep. Very good. Well, good afternoon, everyone. First of all, can I apologise on behalf of Regional Development Minister Shane Jones, who wanted to be here today but has had a series of flight disruptions, but he will be available for questions as soon as he gets here. I am proud to announce today that the Coalition Government has agreed on 149 projects with regionally and nationally significant benefits to be included in Schedule 2 of our one-stop shop fast-track approvals bill. This was a key coalition commitment between National and New Zealand First. These projects will help rebuild the economy, fix our housing crisis, improve energy security and address our infrastructure deficit. They are the first cabs off the rank in our unapologetic drive to grow this economy for the benefit of all New Zealanders. Houses, roads, ports, renewables, quarries and mines are all fundamental requirements for our economy to thrive. Some may not like it, but there is no doubt we need all of them. For too long, our country has been held back by red and green tape stifling economic development. For too long, obstruction has got in the way of growth. Fast Track is all about getting New Zealand moving. These projects that have been selected have gone through a thorough and robust process, which included an open application process run by the Ministry for the Environment, analysis by officials, independent assessment and recommendations processed by the Independent Advisory Group, and final decisions made by Cabinet. All 149 projects Cabinet has agreed were recommended for listing in the bill by the Independent Advisory Group. As I said, the 149 projects have regionally and nationally significant benefits. For example, the 44 listed housing developments will enable up to 55,000 new homes to be consented in New Zealand's major growth centres and across our regions, playing a significant role in addressing our housing crisis. There are 143 infrastructure projects that will help address our infrastructure deficit and, amongst other benefits, result in at least 180 kilometres of new road, rail and public transport routes. Having these projects fast-track will mean that we can continue moving at pace to deliver a new generation of roads of national significance and roads of regional significance to support economic growth and get New Zealand people and freight to where they need to go quickly and safely. The 8 quarrying projects on the list will help enable these roads and public transport projects and other future infrastructure projects. There are 22 renewable energy projects on the list, which will help electrify the New Zealand economy, boost our energy security, and help New Zealand address its climate change goals. New Zealand has abundant renewable energy resources. It's one of our comparative advantages as a country, but the planning system puts barrier after barrier in the way of taking advantage of these resources. Collectively, the 22 projects will contribute an additional 3 gigawatts of generation capacity if they're all consented. By way of comparison, Auckland's historic peak demand is about 2 gigawatts. The 11 mining projects will make a major contribution to our objective of doubling the value of our mineral exports to $2 billion by 2035, extracting coal, gold, iron sands and mineral sands. These mining projects are expected to deliver measurable benefits to regional and national GDP, highly skilled and highly paid jobs in the regions, and other associated benefits like the retention of regional infrastructure. The 7 aquaculture and farming projects will strengthen partnerships with iwi to boost Maori development and are expected to have an output of up to 143 tonnes per annum. So what happens next? Once the bill is passed by the end of the year, the 149 projects listed will be able to apply to the Environmental Protection Authority to have an expert panel assess their projects and apply relevant conditions. We'd like to thank all the applicants who submitted projects to be considered for inclusion in the bill and the Independent Advisory Group for their work in assessing these applications. Fundamentally, the Fast Track Approvals Bill is about getting New Zealand moving, cutting through the red and green tape that has created an obstruction economy. The Fast Track Bill is about creating an environment where we can get on and build the projects New Zealand needs to get ahead. It's about jobs and growth, it's about regional development, it's about addressing our housing crisis, it's about redressing our infrastructure deficit, it's about building more renewable energy around the country so we can achieve our carbon goals and climate change goals. It's about the growth that New Zealand needs to get ahead in the 21st century. With that, happy to take your questions.
One of the first things that people will do when they look through this list is consider what potential conflicts of interests ministers may have had. I'm looking at, for example, the Winton Land project. I know National got some donations from their developers. Can you just talk about how you mitigated those risks throughout the process?
Sure. Really good question. So as the policy was being developed, we sought advice on any conflict of interest matters from the Cabinet Office, and management plans were put in place as appropriate. In terms of the decision making, a group of delegated ministers, made decisions on the final project list after considering recommendations from the independent fast track project advisory group and the advice from the officials. We were mindful of the need to manage actual or perceived conflict of interest. So with the Prime Minister's agreement, transfers of responsibility were put in place to ensure that no minister took part in considering a project for inclusion in relation to where they had a conflict of interest. Once the delegated ministers had made decisions, the final list of projects was considered by Cabinet Committee and then Cabinet, and ahead of those meetings, all ministers were asked to review their interests and declare at the meeting any conflicts of interest in relation to any of the listed projects.
Any conflicts raised?
Well, I'm not going to, yes, is the short point, but I'm not going to get into the specifics of that. But you can be confident that we followed a very thorough series of advice from the Cabinet Office, and right from the start of this process, we have had that, ministers have had that at the front of our minds in relation to this process, precisely because of that issue.
Did you recuse yourself on that Winton one?
Well, I'm not going to get into the specifics of every minister and every person. I'll just repeat what I just said, which is that with the Prime Minister's agreement, transfers of responsibility were put in place to ensure no minister took part in considering a project for inclusion in relation to where they had a conflict of interest, and conflicts were declared.
Given that Winton were major donors, one way or another, to the National Party, how were you able to just deal with that by recusing ministers? Surely you should have had to recuse the entire National Party or National Caucus.
No, donations in and of themselves, the advice I've received is that donations in and of themselves to parties do not create a conflict of interest for the government. As I say, in relation to the conflict of interest process, we took thorough and robust advice from the Cabinet Office and followed their recommendations to ministers to the letter of the letter, it's not the law, but the letter of their advice to us as ministers, and that's really important. We've been really mindful and conscious of that process the whole way through.
How is it that donations don't lead to conflicts of interest?
Well, you'd have to talk to the Cabinet Office around that. All I can do is repeat to you what we have been advised, is that we followed the process laid out in the by the Cabinet Office in relation to the declarations of conflicts of interest and the management of those conflicts of interest.
I believe that as a National Party minister you were conflicted?
All I can do is, I'm not going to go into the specific details of specific projects, but they do know that. They're very clearly. I'll just repeat what I said, which is that we followed the advice from the Cabinet Office when it comes to the declaration and the management of conflicts of interest. I'm not going to get into specific projects and exactly where those conflicts arose, because, but other than to say there were conflicts and they were managed appropriately.
Are you able to say if it was all ministers, did all ministers, all three ministers, have to step back in some respects with regards to different projects, or was it one minister, was it two?
There were a variety of ministers with a variety of conflicts, and all of those were declared and managed in the appropriate way.
How many of these projects do you expect will be approved in the 12 months after the bill goes through?
Well, that will depend. The bill has yet to pass. There's a few steps to go through. We're going to lay these projects before the House by way of an amendment paper. It's what used to be called a supplementary order paper. That will then go into Schedule 2 of the bill. The bill will then need to pass. We're expecting to have the bill passed by the end of the year. And then the Environmental Protection Authority will be setting up the necessary processes for people to apply, and that will take place in the first quarter of 2025, and then there'll be a process by which applicants can apply directly to the EPA for an expert panel to be set up. So it will depend a bit on how many of the projects are able to get up and running and apply straight away. Some probably will, some will not. And then it will be a matter of months before those projects are approved. So our hope and our expectation, in fact, is that we will have some projects approved next year.
I guess what I'm asking is the EPA going to be sufficiently resourced so that you've got this list here, but that the funnel doesn't become very narrow and then everyone has to, I was waiting months and months or years for the EPA to kind of sort that thing out.
Yes, there's work underway right now by ministers and officials to make sure that EPA is resourced sufficiently, and there's a bunch of work underway to make sure that we can stand the expert panels up as quickly as possible, and that we have enough expertise around the country by way of the expert panels as well. One change we are going to make, which is different to the previous government's fast track through COVID, is allow panellists to basically be paid market rates. So one of the pieces of feedback from the last government's fast track legislation was that expert panel members received essentially a daily rate, which was far below their hourly rate as lawyers or environmental consultants, for example, and so there was a real disincentive for people to participate in the process because they could make, they could earn more money doing other things, basically, and so we're going to change that and allow daily market rates that the market wants to be charged, and ultimately the applicants will pay for all of that. So it's clearly in the applicant's interest to have qualified panel members as part of assessing the projects, and the feedback we've had is that applicants will be happy to pay appropriate market rates, and so our expectation is that will lead to many more people, lawyers and environmental consultants, for example, willing to be part of the expert panel process. So that work is underway right now.
How did Cabinet get from the 380 odd projects down to 149? Like, was there a process? Like, what was prioritised? Can you just take us into the process of it?
Yeah, sure. So there were 384 applicants. Let me just run you through the numbers. 384 applications applied for Schedules 2A and 2B. The independent advisory group recommended 199 for 2A and 143 for 2B, and 42 were not recommended for listing. We agreed to basically take the 149 that were recommended and put them into the bill. As you know from the press release, we've decided to do away with Schedule 2B. Just introduced an element of confusion that wasn't necessary, frankly, given we'd picked 149 projects. As to how we got down from the 199 to the 149, we took advice from officials, the whole range of different government agencies involved, and we essentially got to 149 because there are capacity constraints in the system. We want to make sure that we were taking the highest value projects with the highest benefits, and so the advisory group, which we're going to release very soon, you'll see that they essentially provided a range of different recommendations as to the benefits of projects, and for the most part, we took the projects that were recommended to be the most beneficial, and whilst balancing that against the fact that we obviously, we clearly couldn't take 342 projects, for example, that the system would not be able to cope with that. There is a limit, and we think we've got the balance about right.
I see as well you've reiterated that it'll be the expert panel, Cabinet or the government's proposing that makes the final decision. With the quarrying and mining projects in mind, is it possible that any of them would get through the EPA and expert panel advice and get the go-ahead? Or is it a waste of time to even list them?
Well, once the bill is reported back, they'll be able to apply like everybody else. There is no doubt that quarrying and mining has a really important role to play in the New Zealand economy. It is really hard to consent a quarry right now, and one of the reasons why construction cost inflation for roads, for example, has been so high in New Zealand over the last few years is that we have a shortage of aggregate and shortage of fill for some of these projects. It's really hard to consent a quarry. Talk to anybody who owns or wants to expand a quarry. It's really hard, and we need more quarries. It is a basic requirement of a modern country that you have quarries with the material that comes from quarries. So our expectation is that we need more of them and we want them. That's why they're listed in the bill.
Do you expect the EPA the expert panel will see the need for more quarries and mines?
Well, the listing of these projects in the bill by the government is a clear indication of our desire to get these projects consented and get them built. And we've got a range of different projects, from renewables to quarries to mines to housing developments to infrastructure projects, port infrastructure, for example. All of these things are the requirements for a modern economy. and they're too hard to do in New Zealand right now. That's why we're doing fast track.
Just to make clear, I mean, the new panel won't be deliberating on the desirability or otherwise of projects, will it? It's looking at the environmental impact and any extra conditions that need to be added to.
Yeah. So the point of listing these projects in 2A is that it is the government and then the Parliament, once the bill passes, endorsing that these projects have national and regional benefits. And then it goes to the panel to apply the relevant environmental conditions upon which the projects will happen. As we've indicated already, we're also recommending to the Select Committee that the panels will have the ability to turn down projects. So projects go off, the panel will apply conditions. If it transpires that you just can't do conditions in a way that means the project can happen in a responsible way, the panel can turn down the projects, and the bill is before the Select Committee, so you can wait and see where the bill comes back out of Select Committee, but you'll be able to see the circumstances and the criteria once the bill comes back around how that would take place.
Can you put on another hat and as Minister of Sport?
Yes.
And tell us how the Eden Park retractable roof is going to be funded. Is the government prepared to kick in some money?
So I'm not going to get into specific details of each individual project, other than to say, just because a project has been listed in the bill does not mean funding is attached to the project. Now, there are clearly a range of projects here that have big funding implications for both the Crown but also the private sector. Just because something is listed as something that the government wants to consent and approve from a permitting point of view does not mean there is an expectation that funding will attach to that particular project. The funding is separate, and we go through a budget process and a funding process. NZTA has their processes. There's a whole range of different things. For the private sector projects, clearly there may be some projects that aren't funded right now in terms of the private sector as well. But getting projects consented in and of itself is a massive benefit. One of the big problems with New Zealand is that we don't have, or at least the private sector would argue, that we lack a pipeline of projects that are consented and are ready to go. And typically what we do in New Zealand is we get the funding available and then we go off and get a project consented. And in relation to a wind farm, it can take anywhere from 3 to 5 to 7 years. Likewise quarries, likewise transport projects as well. The consenting of it in and of itself takes an extremely long time. Fast track is about reversing that and saying, okay, we're going to get a whole suite of projects lined up, consented, permitted and ready to go, and as funding becomes available and as the economic circumstances, which obviously vary from day to day, get in place, people can go off and get those projects built. But dealing with the consenting, most reasonable independent observers from the infrastructure space and the broader energy sector would tell you the consenting costs alone are a massive driver of delay and cost. And so we are dealing with that through fast track. But the actual funding of projects is a separate issue.
Can you talk a bit more about the agricultural stuff and how that'll help the primary sector? What sort of things? Irrigation, what are they?
You can see it in the list. There's a whole range of different projects, and I'll just refer you to the list. Did you say aquaculture or agriculture? Agriculture. Yeah. You can see all the various things on the list there. All I would say to you is that it's a pretty impressive list across the economy, across different sectors. From housing, I'm particularly excited about 55,000 new houses being consented, for example. The quarries and the mines are important. The 22 renewable energy projects are extremely important for the country. There's a variety of infrastructure projects as well. All I can do is just refer you to the list. There's a whole range of different projects that will have benefits, across the economy.
I'm not sure the Meridian is on that list, is it? Is the Meridian on that list? Because they're halfway through a consenting process at the moment. It's about 1/6 of New Zealand's electricity.
Good question. There's 149 of them, so I'm not super familiar with every single one of them. I'll just refer you to the list.
Going through each of the projects.
Sorry, we'll step down the front here.
This gives Select Committee 10 working days to consider the new list and the new information.
Bill's not going to these projects aren't going to the Select Committee. They will be put into the bill by way of an amendment paper once the bill gets reported back from the Select Committee.
When you're going through and choosing the projects, did you consider what simply might be popular with voters? Because there's quite a few projects in there that are good retail projects like the Eden Park and Kadrona and Coronet Peak. Was that a consideration?
We took the advice from the independent group really seriously. That's why we set the group up. when we started this process, we said, what's the most professional and competent way to make sure we have good advice about what projects will be good and not so good. And we set up that independent group specifically back in March, I think it was, for that reason. And there was an independent process completely insulated from ministers. So we, other than setting the group up and giving them a mandate, we didn't have anything to do with that process. They then gave us a report, and as I said, you'll see when you get the report released in a few days, you can see that they ranked the priority order of projects, for example. For the most part, we have picked the ones that they recommended as high priority projects. So, it's nice that you think there'll be some projects with retail appeal here, but that wasn't top of mind. My personal view is all of the 149 projects have real retail appeal. We have an infrastructure deficit, we have a housing crisis, and we have an energy shortage. And Fast Track will go a long way to addressing all of those problems in the New Zealand economy. We have a growth problem in New Zealand. We have been in recession for the better part of 2 years. We've got to grow our way out of the recession, and Fast Track is about doing that.
The Trans-Tasman Resources seabed mining project is on the list. That's received a lot of opposition, and there's been some court issues with that. Why wade into that? Why put that on the list?
Well, it was recommended by the Independent Advisory Group, and we have put it into the bill. I've no doubt that there will be some projects on this list that are controversial. There's no doubt about that. But I'll just make this point to you. As I said before, just moments ago, we are in a recession. We have been for the better part of 2 years. We have been a low growth economy. This government wants New Zealand to be a high growth economy. Growth is what enables the economy to provide flourishing jobs and the public services that we depend on. The reason why Australia has better public services than New Zealand is because they are 30% wealthier than we are. And the reason they are is because for 30 years they have grown faster than New Zealand. We want New Zealand to be an ambitious country with high quality public services and with good paying jobs so that New Zealanders can conceive of their own conception of the good life, look after their families and enjoy the kind of material comforts that other countries enjoy. That's what growth means. We've got to get back to an economy where growth is paramount, and we do as much as we can to get growth into the arteries of this economy. That hasn't been the case for a large number of years. Part of that is our planning laws. It makes it hard to do quarries, hard to do mines, hard to build wind farms. Why does it take years and years to consent wind farms? Why does it take years and years to consent new housing subdivisions? All of these problems have been inherent in the New Zealand economy for so long. Fast Track is not the sole answer, but it's a big part of the solution to our growth challenges as a country.
Have you had any official advice on the impact of, I know it's early days and they're not even being listed in the bill, but on the impact of the Fast Track projects or the legislation? Sorry, official advice on the impact on our emissions targets, our budgets and our Paris Agreement, or am I getting too far ahead of myself?
No, we haven't had any, well, I'd have to go back and check, but from memory we haven't had any specific advice around it. I'd have to go back and check, so I don't want to mislead you. But all I will say is we've got a very ambitious goal as a government around our renewable energy in the country. The renewable energy projects on the list will make a major contribution towards helping achieve some of those targets. We have abundant renewable energy resources in this country. We have wind, some of the best wind in the world, high capacity factors for our wind farms. Solar is increasingly economic in New Zealand. We have geothermal. We have a whole range. We have obviously hydro, which is well established in New Zealand and plays a major role in the security of the grid. And we want New Zealanders to take more advantage of our renewable energy resources, and that will be a major driver towards the electrification of the economy, which reduces emissions over time.
And how excited are you to see more houses built?
Well, we have a housing crisis in this country. As I've talked at this podium before, it's one of my driving forces and driving motivations to being in politics is to redress our housing crisis. Over the last 20 years, we've seen the fastest house price growth in the Western world. And it's crazy because we're only 5 million people in a country the landmass the size of the United Kingdom. There is no reason for us to have a housing crisis. It is restrictive planning rules that have enabled that housing crisis and enriched a whole series of people who have been able to take advantage of the circles we draw around our major cities and the restrictive planning rules that enable land prices to appreciate at unsustainable rates. So Fast Track is about smashing through some of those barriers. The broader housing crisis is going to be addressed through our Going for Housing Growth policy, which is about dealing with land supply, infrastructure funding and financing, and council incentives. You've heard me make announcements about Pillar 1 of that policy, which is land supply. We've got some work underway right now, and as part of our Q4 action plan is the infrastructure funding and financing settings around councils and incentives as well. But there's no doubt that these projects, if consented, will make a major contributor to addressing our housing crisis.
Make housing cheaper?
Over time, yes, because fundamentally housing prices are driven by supply and demand, and we are intensely focused as a government on the supply side of the equation. There is no other sustainable long-term way to address our housing crisis other than focusing on the fundamentals, which is about land supply and making sure that houses can be built. And that is the driver of our focus as a government in relation to housing, is freeing up land both inside our cities and at the edge of our cities, and sorting out the infrastructure constraints that mean that houses simply can't be built because of a lack of infrastructure. We are dealing with the fundamentals, and that will help everybody. It will help New Zealanders who are looking for a warm and dry home. It will help public housing as well, and you'll see that there's actually some Crown projects on this list. The Carrington residential development, for example, which is almost 40 hectares of Crown-owned land in Mount Albert, 4,000 to 4,500 homes in a mixture of typologies. Is a partnership between MHUD and the local mana whenua in Auckland. So there's a range of different projects on the list as well.
How much time is shaved off the development timeline if they go through the fast track process?
It will depend on the project, and it will depend on the submissions that go to the expert panels. What I would say in a general sense is our expectation is it will take the approvals of these projects from a matter of years down to months. And so you'll see when the bill gets reported back from Select Committee that there's a range of timeframes in the bill. We put in place and recommended to the committee that there'll be there's off-ramps. So if an applicant wants to pause the process, for example, for a variety of different reasons, they're able to do that. But speaking generally, some of these projects that are listed on the that we've selected for inclusion in the bill would take years and years and years to consent. Our expectation is that that will now go down to months.
And as Sports Minister, how chuffed are you to see that Eden Park on the list?
Well, I haven't analysed it with my Sports Minister hat on, to be honest. It was recommended for inclusion on the list by the advisory group, so we selected it, and it'll go forward into the bill.
Oh, but the punters will be happy to see that kind of
Sorry, say that again.
Punters will likely be happy to see that on the list, and they've been waiting a long time for that redevelopment.
Yeah, I think people will be happy.
Excitement.
Well, I think people will be happy to see a whole variety of some of these projects. There'll also be unhappiness as well. There are some controversial projects on this list. There's no doubt about that. There's some really great projects and there's some controversial ones. What I'd say to you though is we've got to grow as an economy.
When will the advisory group materials be released?
Next week.
Just going back to that comment you just made, is it fair to say that you're not scared to be controversial in order to boost our economy?
Well, this government was elected to rebuild the economy, and it was also elected to make tough decisions. Rebuilding our economy is going to take time, and it's going to involve a series of tough decisions, and the Fast Track Bill is one of the ways that we can rebuild the economy and grow our way out of the recession that we've been in for the last 2 years. It's about jobs and growth and about economic development, and ultimately that is good for all New Zealanders. We are a government that does not shy away from those tough decisions. We have to make some big calls to grow our economy, and ultimately many of the projects that have been controversial in the past are now widely accepted once they're underway and built. And our expectation is the same will be true when it comes to some of these fast track projects that are a bit controversial.
And also on the conflict of interest questions, do you personally feel ethically comfortable with how this has all gone?
Yes. We have gone through a really thorough and robust process. We have taken Cabinet Office advice throughout. The Prime Minister made it clear to all ministers right from the start that compliance with the instructions from the Cabinet Office have been extremely important, and we have been extremely thorough and robust in following that process as laid out by the Cabinet Office, so I'm very comfortable with the way things have gone.
Just looking down the the road a little bit. I mean, if this all turns out as you want it to, and that projects start getting consented and there's capital in place and funding, has thought been given to some of the other kind of economic settings that are going to be required, like around immigration, trades training, that sort of thing, so you don't have all these projects and then basically a labour market crunch, say in 2 years' time?
Yeah, I mean, there's work underway in relation, as you know, there's work underway in relation to huge parts of our economic settings. So, you know, foreign investment is something that we're having a look at, obviously, and we've got various coalition commitments around that. And you know, in due course, there'll be a range of other things we need to look at. Fast track is part and parcel of our planning reforms. Obviously, we've got phase 3 of the Resource Management Act reform underway. Fast track is a way to get some projects consented and permitted and up and running, but it shouldn't just be for national and regional projects that get an expedited way through the consenting system. There's for every regional or national project, there's dozens, hundreds of smaller scale projects right around the country who have to deal with the strictures of the Resource Management Act, and we want to free up those as well. And that's why the work I'm doing as RMA Minister on phase 2 and then phase 3 of the RMA obviously is really, really important. We need a more liberalising regime across the whole economy, and you know, you can expect more announcements about that over the balance of this Parliament.
Can I just ask you a question about the announcements you made on Friday with respect to the school property deal? Why isn't the government using Raupainga to administer school property?
Oh well, we are actually. They are delivering some projects with the Ministry of Education right now. I couldn't give you the exact number because I don't have it in front of me, but they are working with the Ministry of Education on some projects right now, and that is one of the things we're looking at as part of the next stage of the response to the school property inquiry, is exactly how they might play a role as part of potentially setting up a new entity to deliver those, that very important school property portfolio. So we're giving some consideration to that, but they are working with the ministry right now. We've been able to achieve quite a lot already just in the last 9 months, just through discipline and focus, and just saying to the ministry, why are you not making more use of modular off-site building, for example? So I think Q4 2023, from memory, it was about 20% of new school builds or school property upgrades were off-site modular building. It's now over 60%. We were out on Friday at Niche Modular. Fantastic. We saw some school classrooms that were going off, I think, in the next week or so up to Maclean's College in Auckland. They'll be on site, installed within 3 weeks. And I can tell you for free, there's plenty of elected MPs and plenty of school communities around the country that have waited, 2, 3, 4 years for just a single classroom to arrive. And so we've been able to achieve quite a lot just by directing that you place a lot more of a focus on off-site modular, which are cheaper. They're able to be delivered more quickly and more efficiently. And they're warm and dry. These are very high quality classrooms, and you just wonder why we weren't doing that before. But that's all right. That we've inherited a problem in lots of different areas, and we're just working our way through solving it.
But as a government which is committed to reducing the size of the state, why are you even talking about a new entity to do the job of one that already exists?
Well, Raupainga does a whole range of other things other than school property. For example, they're building the Metro Sports down and overseeing the delivery of Metro Sports down in Christchurch. So it's a whole range of different things, and that's one of the factors we are looking at. It would be if we did do it, it would be a lift and shift probably from the ministry. So you would take out some of the ministry property function into a separate entity. And one of the things we're looking at is exactly what the functions of that entity would be. Would having a separate entity deliver the efficiencies and operational gains that you want? So that's a legitimate question. That's exactly one of the things we're looking at. We haven't made a call to do it yet. The report recommended it. We're just taking further advice on that around the functions. School property ownership is complicated, frankly, and tricky, and so that's factoring into it as well. All right.
That is a press release saying that this list reveals your backroom deals. Do you want to respond to that?
The Labour Party set up Fast Track themselves. So they had their own Fast Track. David Parker listed, from memory, around 20 projects for inclusion in their own Fast Track regime. So we have taken the model that they themselves pioneered. We have essentially elevated it, We've selected more projects, we've made it into a one-stop shop regime, and we are going to put it through the Parliament. But David Parker and the Labour Party realised that the RMA was a stumbling block to growth, and it stopped projects happening that the government wanted to happen. That's why Labour created their own fast-track process and selected their own projects for listing in the bill. So what's good for the goose is good for the gander, and it's a bit rich for the Labour Party to complain about something that they themselves created. We have supercharged it, but we are going to put it into law and get on with the projects that New Zealand needs to grow and get ahead.
David Parker makes the point, though, that Labour fast-tracked 100 projects without overriding environmental laws.
Well, the fast-track bill that is before the Parliament allows the placing of relevant environmental conditions on the projects to make sure that you can balance up the necessity of getting on with these projects with the environmental effects that they obviously have, and those environmental effects vary depending on the project. But looking after the environment is extremely important as well. But there's no doubt that we are changing the balance away from a sole focus on environmental effects and management of those effects towards development. That's why we have fast track. Thanks.